Okay, then everyone, we'll get started. So thank you for joining us today, wherever you are in the world. This webinar is part of our Equity in Games-Based Approaches series as part of our 40th anniversary celebration of TGfU. So thank you very much for joining us today. This webinar is the final in our series and will be on promoting justice, equity, diversity and inclusion, which is JEDI, through GBAs in PE, a practical implication. I would like to thank the presenters for joining us today and for all of you as well. I would like to hand over to Dr. Korey Boyd, who will begin the presentation. Korey.
Thank you, Ellen. Good morning, everyone, or good evening. My name is Dr. Korey Boyd. I'm an assistant professor at Springfield College here in the US. I am here to present with Dr. Kanae Haneishi. She is an associate professor at Western Colorado University in the US. Dr. Bruce Nkala from the Shipley School here in the US. Mr. Teng, Sheng, from the Physical Education and Sport Teacher Academy in Singapore, and with Dr. Linda Griffin from the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. We have all witnessed numerous incidences related to inequity and discrimination, as well as racial and social injustice in our society, such as the Black Lives Matter movement, violence against Asian people during the COVID-19 pandemic, the Me Too movement, gang violence, and countless hate crimes and mass shootings. The Russian invasion in Ukraine has shown the world an ultimate scene of social injustice. In the school setting, our students in this generation are facing a wide variety of challenges, such as cyberbullying, school shootings, mental health, and increase in suicide attempts and deaths are just some of those examples. Now more than ever, children, adolescents, young adults need a quality education for physical health, mental health, social and emotional intelligence, equity, diversity, inclusion, and social justice. Next slide, please. Thank you. Physical education teachers are in a unique position to create a learning environment that can touch mind, body, and spirit, teach lifelong skills that enhance individuals' physical and mental health, develop critical life skills and complex human dynamics, teach cultural and history, address social injustices through instructional strategies. Politicalization of school curriculum, content, injustice practices, and oppression towards persons of minoritized background, such as race, language, religion, and socioeconomic status, just to name a few, have challenged physical educators to expand the physical education curriculum or physical education learning environment and promote equitable and just practices. In other words, the uniqueness of physical education as a subject is to be able to cover all domains of learning. PE offers the opportunity to navigate challenging tasks through face-to-face negotiations and discuss, and in a context where it becomes difficult to smooth over or ignore such problems as inequity, unfairness, and injustice. Physical education teachers can create learning environments where justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion outcomes are embedded in the learning experience. PE offers such opportunities to observe, experience, and discuss inequity around difference and power. Rather than talking about JEDI matters in the abstract, students can explore and learn the importance of JEDI firsthand as they practice these democratic principles and skills required to develop an ethic of care. PE teachers thus play a unique role in the social justice movement as they address human dynamics and complexity in our society during their lessons.
Okay, so now I'm gonna talk about why game-based approach to address JEDI. So game-based approach offers a venue for physical education teachers to foster JEDI, where all students are respected and feel sense of belonging. So by nature, games are a reflection of a society. Since games are social, dynamic, and public, social issues such as discrimination or inequity often emerged during the gameplay or among student interaction. So using key pedagogical features such as modified games, problem solving, or student-centered and critical dialogue, game-based approach offers a practical tools for physical education teachers to address social issues and foster JEDI in their tactical game teaching. According to Butler 2016, game-based approach values the ability to work cooperatively and make smart democratic decisions as much as it does the performance of physical skill. So students taught using game-based approach are provided opportunity to create a space where they discuss, problem solve, and support each other, while teachers deliberately facilitate a safe learning space. So when planned and delivered carefully and intentionally by the teachers, the space can promote JEDI, where differences such as race, age, gender, sexual orientation, ability, religion, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, or things like here on the slide are addressed, and our game learning space become inclusive, equitable, and just for all students. Games, when well designed, become the teacher. When that happens, students not only learn skills and game concept, but also they will be confronted with situations related to JEDI, where they will have opportunity to experiment with and discuss with their peers. Game-based approach can create the third space in physical education learning. So this third space concept has been recently introduced in the field of kinesiology. So what it is the idea of inclusion used to be often about creating a bridge for the marginalized identity to cross into the space of dominant culture. In other words, that those who are marginalized are invited to enter the hegemonic space that can further alienate and redefine them. So instead, this third space concept defines the inclusion as creating a brand new space for everyone to join. So Block 2021 defined this third space as a space where everyone with marginalized identity genuinely belong, are valued, and relying upon, and empowered, and ultimately matter. Butler 2016 advocates democracy in action through inventing games, which is one of the game-based approaches to teaching physical education. So this inventing games, IG, is an innovative pedagogy to address bullying, teach democracy, and promote social justice. In this pedagogy, students are the ones who develop their own modified games based on the set of frameworks and the parameters specified by the teachers. The teachers ask questions and facilitate critical dialogue among students, so games being developed and played are fair, safe, inclusive, challenging, and fun. The IG model provides teachers with structure guided by IG principles to seize the opportunity in the learning process to teach students not just to play game, but also important values and life skills. In the IG model, the process is equally, if not more, important than product. When students invent games, debate and disagreement happens. Issues on power and inclusivity become more apparent and pressing. Through inventing games, students are provided the opportunity to examine, discuss, and reflect on content, grapple with ethical responsibility, analyze critically, and enact the democratic idea of equality, freedom, and justice. As students confront these issues, they discover more about themselves and their classmates. So this is Heather Heckman's 5 essential components of social justice education, which is one of the several social justice frameworks, and uses the social justice camera to introduce 5 lenses. So this table on this slide provides an overview of how game-based approach lessons can fit with Heckman's social justice education framework. The first one is the content mastery. If students are going to critically think about content, they first must understand the content, not just memorizing the fact, like understanding something from multiple perspectives. In the game-based approach, intentionality and the designed considerations such as exaggeration and representation to highlight the issue create a aporia that mimic the issue in society, as well as game appreciations are emphasized to address this first lens. The second lens is the tools for critical analysis. Whenever students receive information, they should be encouraged to critically analyze this information, meaning moving beyond their own perspective or interpretation, as well as consider power relations. In the game-based approach, teachers ask critical questions, such as how others might perceive the same information differently, or who has access to physical activity based on gender, social class, ethnicity, race, or other factors, and why. And the third lens of the social justice education is the tools for social change, which is the approach of empowerment, such as sharing responsibility with students and promoting student transfer of learning. So in game-based approach, problem solving toward just practice and fair gameplay, and the relevance by relating the lesson to outside the class are emphasized to address this third lens. And the number 4 is tools for personal reflection, which is the self-reflection by teachers and the student. Reflections in relation to power, control, and authorities. So critical reflection and dialogue through problem solving and group discussions are constantly implemented through the game-based approach to address this lens. And the last lens of the social justice education framework is the multicultural group dynamics. Given that it has been shown student-centered and student activist approaches are effective forms of teaching physical education, it is more important for teachers to consider group dynamics. So democratic engagement in lessons through and exchange of ideas and opinions intentionally created opportunity for self and group reflection on various dynamics are embedded in game-based approaches. So these are the overview of how game-based approach can fit into the Heckman's 5 essential components of social justice framework. So now I will hand over to Teng, who will provide a practical implication of game-based approach on JEDI.
Thank you, Kanae. Now let me start by sharing with you a common scene in a typical PE lesson. And while you are watching the short clip, I want you to ask yourself, what do you see? What are you thinking? And what are you wondering? Okay, Kanae can play the clip. Okay, now what we see, think, and wonder depends a lot on the lens we are wearing, the belief you have on teaching and learning, isn't it? Some of you may be seeing that students are probably discussing about strategies and thinking maybe it is half-time team talk and how much time they have already been spending discussing, and wondering possibly are they taking too much time? Shouldn't they be practicing and playing the game? Well, some of us may be seeing that, hey, they are taking turns to discuss. They are including one another. They are communicating well. And you're probably wondering as a teacher, how else can you extend their learning and allowing to understand that they are doing a great job? And inclusion is important, not just in PE lesson, but in their everyday life as well. Now, we believe that every one of us here present have seized moment to teach our kids valuable lessons on values and 21st century competencies, and more specifically on JEDI, because we are educators, yeah, and we want our students to grow with the right values and have the core competencies. We want our students to be better people, and the lens we wear is critical. Our belief in what we should focus in PE. While we are certain that educators agree that learning about JEDI is important, we acknowledge that not everyone will place the same emphasis on JEDI in PE. With limited time and other constraints, some may prioritize the learning of skills and concepts. Now, Bruce and I will attempt to show with examples how a balance can be reached with a little bit of planning. Now, the slide you see is a graphic representation of what Kanae mentioned, and I'm going to go through some important points before I share the examples. Now, mentioned earlier on, you can see here the beliefs are really important. I spoke about it briefly in the previous slide. Now, we generally agree that JEDI are important topics for kids to learn in school. Some of us may not believe that we need to intentionally plan for it. So for JEDI to be successfully included as part of students' learning in games teaching, we first need to believe that PE plays an important role. It's not just that, we also need to believe in the value of using questions and getting kids to discuss and reflect. Now, these are critical pedagogies, and without them, the learning may not be that effective. And in addition, the belief in the role of teachers as facilitator rather than authority of knowledge, like what Kanae mentioned earlier on. And the need to empower our students to solve problems and own their learning. Now, what we believe in, when we believe in something, we have to be intentional in our design to ensure the learning happens by design and not by chance. It should not be an afterthought, but something we need to think about right from the start to ensure the learning happens. The same two principles of exaggeration or representation, as you can see in the diagram, are used to ensure students have the opportunities to experience and maybe even resolve the JEDI situation that are embedded in the game. Now, a game in many ways is a microcosm of our society. Now, if well designed, it puts the students in a situation where they have to make decisions that challenge their own worldview and see things from multiple perspectives. Now, in this way, learning is authentic and it evokes emotions of feeling of anxiety, the frustration, anger, and joy while they play and they discuss, which contributes to deep learning as according to neuroscientists. And the learning is facilitated by the use of questions, and students are afforded time to discuss and reflect. Learning like that cannot be rushed, and time needs to be set aside for them to make sense of the experience individually. Next slide, Kanae. So let me share with you an example to illustrate. Now the game is football, played 3v3 or 4v4 mixed ability grouping. Now the game focus is on keeping possession, on the on and off the ball skills that's required to maintain possession. Yeah, and J.E.D.I focuses on inclusion. So you have the scoring, they have to string 3 passes consecutively in a row to be awarded 1 point, and there's a rule of individually you cannot have more than 3 touches, and the defense is co-defense. Now the team talk is important because it allows students to discuss the strategy and also for teachers to observe if the discussion is done in an inclusive manner. Now, we are pretty sure that you have used this or a variation of this before in the lesson, so it's nothing new. Yeah. So when the game goes on, next slide, Kanae, the teacher will observe, listen, and facilitate. And the teacher does this wearing 2 lenses. One focuses on the gameplay, and the other one focuses on J.E.D.I, and in this case, inclusion. Now, we highlighted earlier on the role of teacher being a facilitator of learning. So this means that we need to give them time to problem solve and not jump in whenever there is an issue. So at an opportune time, the teacher may pause play to facilitate the learning, and that's where the questions come in. Next slide, Kanae. Now, the usual questions may just stop at the second bullet, yeah? So usually teachers will ask the students, so what caused the game to break up? And what do we need to do in order to maintain better possession and play this game successfully? So after these 2 questions, usually students will be sent out to play the game or practice the required skills. But to address inclusion, so this is when we will ask the questions in red. We will layer on the questions if the issue on inclusion didn't come out in the earlier response. For example, was everyone actively involved in the game? So if yes, why? Why is that important? If not, if no, why not? So what can we do to be more inclusive? We thought that this is really important because every individual has a right to be included in the game. So the question will then be, they will be empowered to include rules to make the game more inclusive when they play the game in the next round. So in a game like this, usually what do you think will happen? Well, the less skillful players will be left out usually, right? Because when the ball is being passed to them, they probably, because of their skill level, they are not able to control or pass properly and they lose possession, yeah? So it is important to engage our students in this discussion on inclusion to make their thinking visible to us. Yeah, let them tell us what they feel, about including their teammates who are not as skillful in the game itself, and offer them perspective from their teammate who has been excluded. So after the students get together to discuss the new rule, then we will go into the next round of play. Next slide, Kanae. So similarly, the teacher will observe, will listen, and then facilitate. Yeah. And after the second round of play, students will be asked again. Next slide, Kanae. 2 different kind of questions. Similarly, yeah. So how did the team play differently with the new rule, and what are the areas that the team needs to work on? Now, being able to adapt their play to a new set of rules and the ability to self-assess are critical skills of a team player, which is our aim in GBA, isn't it? Now we'll then layer on the JEDI related question that is highlighted in red. So what might be some of the issues that will be brought up by the students? You know, like for example, if the rule that is decided by the students is we can't pass back to the students who pass to us, so forcing them to include their teammates, right? More of their teammates in the game. The students may say that when we play this rule, the game breakdown is no longer fun. Then that is when the teacher will step in and to facilitate, to let them understand that the reason why the students, their teammates are not able to pass the ball back to them is because they are still learning. And the more we exclude them, the more they will not be able to improve. Then as a team, we need to include everyone to help one another to improve, right? So depending on time, students can play another round with another inclusion of more rules, or spend time practice the skills, or the teachers can just gather everyone to do a final round debrief. Next slide, Kanae. So there are many, these are the possible questions. We're not saying that you have to ask every question. Now, these are the possible questions in the final round of questioning. Now, some of these questions may be discussed during the debrief as a team, or they can be tasked as homework in the form of journal entries. But I would like to bring your attention to the last question here. You know, why is the concept of inclusion important in our society, in our everyday life? Now, the learning should be extended beyond the classroom to allow students to see the relevance, not just in PE lesson itself. Now, the transfer of learning is critical. This is how we feel a child can be nurtured more holistically. And this is something that you'll see in Bruce's example too, isn't it, Bruce?
Yes, it is. I guess Teng just tagged me and I'm it. Thank you, everyone. So in the US, tag games are really a staple within most physical education classes. Teachers often use them as warm-up games and or lead-up activities that set the tone for the class while helping students physically prepare for the class. As lead-up activities, they're often used to cognitively introduce concepts for students that they may be able to transfer to the main segment of the lesson. For example, dodging to avoid being tagged transfers to dodging in flag football. We believe that we can follow this same lead-up activity approach to intentionally tweak some of the game rules in order to address some of the JEDI concepts as part of the curriculum sequence that we're trying to teach, or as a preemptive measure for JEDI issues that may be arising within the main lesson of the class. Again, the intentionality in thinking and planning is really, really important, as Teng just mentioned right now, right? So we employ pedagogical principles like exaggeration and representation to modify some of those tag game rules, much as in the same lessons that Teng was just talking about. But while ours are mainly structured, or that particular time that we mainly structured towards the JEDI concepts. Next slide, please. Yeah. So say you're playing a game of soccer or football, for example, and as in the example before that Teng just mentioned, and you either want to teach justice as part of a curriculum sequence. So let's say you've got a whole sequence on social justice and you want to teach that part of that in your lesson, or you've got a particular class, and every one of us have had it, where this class kind of struggles with conflict resolution, and you're trying to work your way into teaching them how to resolve conflict in a just and equitable manner. You could use games like Yoshi Tag. So Yoshi Tag one team attempts to invade another team in team's territory just to enter a safe zone that has been established in the opponent's territory. This kind of game fits very well within lead-up activities for invasion games. And we believe if we tweak a rule or two, we can use it to teach JEDI concepts like justice. One major rule of this particular game is that if a person gets tagged in an opponent's territory, they freeze and wait to be rescued by their teammate. Once rescued, both people can walk back to in amnesty, back to their side before returning to play. This is the tweakable rule, right? By modifying that walk back rule, you can give one group preferential treatment. Oh, very hard, right? Such as to allow members to simply walk back after being tagged without needing to be rescued, while the other group needs to conform to the original rule, right? This can only cause a riot, we believe, but students will help realize that there's fairness, there's the importance of fairness within this. It matters, in a matter of time, people will start to, it's only a matter of time before the skewed rule is looked at as being unfair. And when that happens, questioning kicks in. That's when we can start teaching what the concepts of justice are. So that's when we go into the breakdown of what Teng was just talking about in terms of questioning. And questioning could go from as simple as, hey, why is this not fair? And have a quick class discussion about why it's not fair. Or you could go to much deeper questions that I feel might, depending on the age that you've got, and that reach into the more higher order learning or higher order questioning, such as, how does it make you feel when others have special rules? These discussions are very, very rich because they can then connect to the real life examples of why is it fair for one person to have, or one group to have something and another group not to have something. And that can inspire conversations about social justice. These can then be referred back into the game and reflected on as, hey, you said that it was not fair for someone else to have certain rules over other rules, when you see a situation like that as a teacher occurring, and you can reach out to students about that and address them from their perspective. Next slide, please. So similarly, equity and equality can be established through intentionally providing inequitable situations. Again, by modifying the rules and the equipment or two, you might be able to achieve this. In this particular example, we taught team tag. Now, team tag is a game where one team tries to tag and eliminate the other team, right? We like to play this with flags in some situations, so as to identify who got tagged. What if, and this is what our thought was, what if we gave one group long flags and the other group short flags? Obviously, there's a level of inequity there in terms of ease of removal of flags. Soon, grumbling will follow, and then there'll be this forms a great segue for our questioning. And our questions were really designed to try and zone in on the importance of having equality, but at the same time, there's an extra layer to that, as in, hey, that might also provide an equitable situation where do you think that having different flags or different length of flags might be beneficial? And then you can start to zone in on equity, which is uniquely different from equality. Equality is having the same level, but equity is resourcing or giving everyone the same support that will give them, some need more support than other people. And that will be the equity part of it. So as you ask questions to the students, and the elephant in the room obviously would be, why is this not fair? But the higher order questions would be, how does that make you feel? Right? How does it make you feel when someone is treated differently or given different tools to succeed? Right? And more importantly, when do you think that could be beneficial? Right? And then you can start to talk about social justice in the world, as in lifting up people from minority backgrounds and giving them extra support, but not necessarily taking away from someone else who's already been privileged enough to have that extra support. Next slide, please. Yeah. Diversity is founded on allowing people different perspectives to be heard and valued. And earlier on, there was an allusion, a link to Joy Butler's invented games approach, which teaches a lot about diversity. The goal in this particular situation is to give every student a chance to be heard in discussion and in conversation. Capture the Flag is another popular game that we use, which is the same as Yoshi Tag, but it's been played so many times. So one of the things that we talked about was, hey, let's lean into Joey Butler's invented games approach and allow kids to modify the rules or to change the rules themselves and provide options to the different rules. Doing so usually inspires the kids that are much more athletically inclined or stronger or the louder voices to dominate the conversation. This is when parameters are important as a teacher, because when you're doing that, you can say, hey, you know what? One of the rules is that everyone in the group must be involved in the discussion. And I want to hear what other people had to say. And you also have to discuss and decide which rule you're going to follow as a particular group. and why you're going to follow it. That discussion and that decision has to be equitable, has to be just, but has to have included all the voices that are there. For example, allowing people to vote within a situation. Interestingly enough, we got a very, I want to just share a few examples of what we got in terms of the rules that were changed. We ended up with something that was usually is played with 2 people, capture the flag is played with 2 people. We had a 3-person game, or the 3-group game, where the 3 different teams, and teams could make alliances. People reshaped boundaries and changed simple things like reshaping boundaries, making it long and narrow, or making it short and wide, so as to allow more spaces in between to be able to get to opposite sides. Hiding the flag in an open position or hiding the flag in a closed position. Those kind of changes were changes that were proposed by the students. Obviously, when you come into it as a teacher, your questioning really is more focused on why is it important to hear all sides, and understanding that there are different perspectives and zoning into the different perspectives that the students are in. Finally, we have inclusion within the JEDI spectrum of concepts. And by nature, PE, as mentioned earlier on, and Korey talked about it, is very inclusive. It allows different people to still participate. It's one of the few physically driven subjects that still allow co-educational engagement. Sports has gone, based on the gender identification or the gender it's more gendered sports. However, students need to understand that there's an importance in including all parties within the activities. One game that we like to play with the younger kids is called Fire and Ice, which is a very popular game. It's where one player has a noodle or a ball that is usually blue, and that person is ice. And then someone else has a ball, which is red, which is called fire. The tagger with the blue tags, if they tag anyone, that person freezes, while the person in the red comes over and thaws them out, and they're able to engage. Each student in the class will take turns participating in different roles within either as the fire or as the ice. There is a chance for rule change, right? What usually happens is that taggers end up tagging people that they're friendly with. Taggers end up chasing people that they find might be easier targets and picking. So there you can make a rule change as a teacher to say, no tag backs allowed. You can have to tag 2 or more people before, or you can tag the fire as well, so as to be able to throw it out. Right. And because kids are kids, some of them might follow the rule, some of them might not follow the rule. Either way, there's going to be an opportunity for you to stop the game and ask the why question, right? And again, seeking to understand or to teach the importance of the certain specific JEDI concept, like, how does it make you feel when you're excluded? How does it make you feel when someone just doesn't tag you or doesn't chase after you? How do you feel about that? And that can be an inspiring discussion. But what is important is, again, what Teng talked about is not only restricting it to the classroom, but expanding all these questions to the greater community and intentionally planning them out as JEDI, using your experience and using your understanding of what your classroom environment is in order to be able to teach these concepts in a very genuine and intentional way. Obviously, we learned a lot from this, and Linda is going to talk about the takeaways that we learned. Linda, tag your it.
Thank you, Bruce and colleagues. So to sum up of where we are, we've been grappling with this for almost 1.5 years, if not longer, even doing some pilot work, but these are our takeaways from our lessons learned so far, in that we believe that sport as content matters. Again, it's been stated, but sport is a microcosm of society and offers a rich learning environment to explore EDI concepts. We believe that the frameworks, all 3 frameworks presented, democracy in action, Thirdspace, and the 5 essential components, provide teachers with a way of framing or leveraging their work. You encouraging teachers not to just take this on, but make sure you're grounded in some sort of framework to help anchor your thoughts as you move forward in this work. We believe the teacher is the architect. We've said that the game is as a teacher, however, the teacher sets the agenda, and so it's important for the teacher to have be intentional by planning these learning experiences within the games. They can't just happen, as everyone has just said. And the other is the cautionary tale of know your context. This work is controversial, there's no question about it. We've even experienced it in our own pilot studies. So we caution you to be, as you move through these sensitive topics, to know who are the students, who's the community you're working in, and how do you move forward with these ideas as you're teaching them within a games-based approach. We're looking for questions and of course thoughtful discussion, because this is the beginning of our work, and grappling with these things are important, but they're not without their own challenges. So we really thank you for attending today. I think there's another slide, but there we go. We're open for questions, comments.
Thank you to our presenters. Does anyone have any questions? Please do put them in the chat, or feel free to speak up.
I have a question.
Claudia?
Yes,
Go on then.
Great job, everyone. Really, I know it's, we can tell it's really hard work in systematizing and thinking about all these and connecting. So congratulations, it's really, really top work. I find it difficult to sometimes operationalize these ideas with older students, especially in the secondary. So I would ask if you could do a reflection on the challenge. How do you work with the challenge of implementing these with older students? Because at least culturally in Portugal, they are more firmly attached to a vision of what PE activities should be, more connected to formal versions of sport. And it is more difficult to modify games, more close to even small-sided games, but more attached to a cultural frame of the sport as each formal version. So I would ask if you, how do you deal with this challenge? Is something that you are used to confront with older students and apply this with this kind of, for example, secondary classes?
I defer to my colleagues. Kanae, Tien, have you worked with the secondary schools, or Bruce?
Yeah, Claudio. I have a similar experience teaching the secondary school, and you're right, especially if the students view physical education as a time when they exercise, when they get out of the classroom and do not spend so much time discussing and teachers asking them questions about inclusion, about communication, and so on. So I do, when I teach a group of 13, 14-year-olds inventing games, yeah, and when we try to lay on the discussion on decision making, effective communication, there were groups of students who just want to play, right? Because their impression of PE is about, you know, it's about moving, basically. They don't like to discuss as a group. But there are other students as well that like this discussion. I think it goes down to preparing them, the environment, rather than going directly into it. Because as mentioned earlier on, there are prerequisites that is required, yeah, for J.E.D.I to happen in class and for the discussion to take place. One of them is the safety of the environment, right? Whether they feel safe to voice out their views, right? Because students' voice is really important. Yeah, if you want them to to have their ideas heard. And if the synergy and the trust in the class, student to teachers is not there, and if we try to get students to address this, then you will see silence. Even if they feel strongly about it, they will not say it. So that's one. Personally, I find relating my own stories is powerful, and telling your stories. I have a situation when the particular lesson focus is on communication, and in inventing games, we design the experience. We know that students will have an argument, yeah, because it's embedded in our design. And the reflection is for them, the question is for them to talk about how they have communicated during the discussion stage, right? Were they kind? Did they use hurtful words, for example? Did everyone have an opportunity to speak their mind? Were they clear? Were they listening? So they were discussing, and at the end, I round up, telling them my example, why communication is so critical in life, and why am I getting them to talk about it. So I share the examples of me having quarrels with my little girl, with my wife at home, and even adults are struggling with this. And it is a key skill that they need to learn, because if not, conflicts will happen. And while the homework is for them to reflect on a conflict that happened with them, with their families or with their friends, as a result of communication breakdown. So students at their older level, when they are older, they are able to see this connection. Yeah, and when they see the relevance of it in their life, and the next time when you ask them about JEDI or other core competencies again, I think the buying in is there. So the effort needs to be done, to be invested, to get buy-in. It will take time, definitely. I'm not saying that the first lesson they will all be very excited about it. It may not happen. So you need a little bit of patience and a little bit of try and error, and really investing to explain to them why are we doing this. Yeah, Bruce.
I would add to that make sure. Well, for me, what has also helped. It's good that you asked that question, because culturally they're different. So I taught in Botswana. In Botswana, culturally, students do not ask. You don't ask questions to students and have them respond with how they feel or how they think this is supposed to be. Usually, you're the teacher and you're giving me the knowledge. So changing that cultural approach to learning was difficult. When you come to the US, students really love being asked what they feel like. Their opinions are heard. So you're understanding which way you are within your culture is going to be important. As you start to slowly change, I'm going to talk to the one about Botswana. Changing that culture is very, 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 it's a long process. Well, but it's done. I found a lot of success with it when I was doing it really slowly but methodically. So when I change anything, for example, a game that we're playing, say we're doing 3-on-3, like what Teng was just explaining in the game before. So 3-on-3, no pass backs or whatever it is. That game I was playing for a very, very short time, right? Teasing out the questions, but going into the main unrestricted game really quickly, because that allowed them to engage in it and start to buy into the process and understand that, oh, we're only going to do this for a short time, and then from there go into it. It goes back to what Judith Rink always used to say, like, when are we going to play? Kids always ask, when are we going to play? So you want to keep that modified section as you start to build the cultural understanding in the very, very small short segment of it. However, in the US, for example, when I teach here, it's much different. It's easier for me because they know I'm going to ask them about how they feel about something, or they'll get an opportunity to express their opinion. So they look forward to that part of it. The other thing is the social dynamics. When you're asking questions, for us at any high school level, the kids are too cool for school. No one wants to answer any questions. No one wants to be that person that, I'm the teacher's pet. No, they don't want to have, you don't want to be too cool for school. So if we started by limiting our questions, I'm talking about we in our school, we started by limiting our questions to really choice type questions. Would you go left or right? And they'll say, oh, I'll go left. Okay, great. Why would you go left? Or because the left side is open. Great, let's go back to the game. And not spending too much time delving into the deeper order questions. And as time went on towards the end of the unit, you could now start to ask those bigger, more critical, open-ended questions because you've established the culture. So in a nutshell, it's all about establishing your culture at the beginning and breaking down those barriers with very, very small segments and spending very little time, because it's almost like a balance, it's a hybrid. You've got to give them what they're looking for, but at the same time, you've got to give them what they need. And sometimes you've got to balance out that what they need is a really small amount, and then slowly gets to a point where what they need is what you're giving them more. I don't know if I answered the question.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for
I
that
just
one.
got one question to ask. Hello.
Yes. Hiya.
This is Sanmuga from Malaysia. A great presentation, and thank you for sharing a great knowledge to all the presenters. My curiosity is that how do you address a JEDI to low skill and low cognition level of students? Can you give a practical example? How do you address this? The students who have low skill and low knowledge level.
I can start. So I think that's a great question. Thank you, Samuga. In our society, we have that, like any part of like our life, like someone is, there's somebody who's good at it, somebody may not, in the many different aspects in our society. So it's very important to teach that, to work with people and how to help each other. So let's say if there's some student who are really good at it and they know about the games like intelligently in a certain sports, and there might be somebody not, and then like our point here is to like teach them to how to work together, and then how to be inclusive regardless of what they have, like what their abilities are. So like to answer more specifically about your question is, let's say if you have a student who may have this not much understanding, like cognitively or like physically, then like we create the culture that like the student who are good at it or know about the games cognitively, help them to improve at the same time. Does that make sense?
You're talking about that high skill student helping the low skill student to have the problem solved.
So to emphasizing it, to emphasize that part of like including all students.
But at times, high skill student, they try to dominate,
Yes.
And then they make the low skill student look very shy. At times, they can shy away from playing games. How do you tackle this kind of situations?
Right.
Well,
yeah. Can I jump in for this?
What I'll add.
Okay, go ahead, Korey. Go ahead.
Yeah. So what I also will consider is think about understanding your students, but also think about the notion of how the teacher is the architect or the facilitator of the learning, and that can offer this based off how the model is structured. That lends the teacher with the autonomy to work with smaller groups. So the teacher can step in and to scaffold a little bit more for those cognitively lower skilled students, or just even this teacher may be able to step in and play games or modify or tweak some of the rules to help those lower skilled students. And so ideally, it's not a one size fits all solution, but as Bruce mentioned earlier, you have to know your students, you have to understand that culture. And when you're in this model, you'll see where you need to step in as a teacher to actually take a command style, or you let them explore their options. Teng?
Yeah, sure. Let me jump in to answer my brother, because from Malaysia and from Singapore, we are.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. I have this experience. I was doing inventing games with students, and you're right. Those who are not skillful enough usually will be excluded. But in inventing games, we have the principles of a good game: fun, fair, flow for everyone. Of course, it includes challenge and safe as well, right? So the part where it says for everyone, right, which is inclusive, it is very important. So when they play the game, and if the game is dominated by the skillful player, I will get the students to change the rules such that it is more inclusive for everyone, right? Because when students are not included in a game because they are less skillful, it's not fun. It may be fun for the skillful player, but it's not fun for their friends who are less skillful. So how do we then change the rule to make it more playable for their friends? So they can say, perhaps, let's say, for example, they remove a rule for, let's say, there's no time limit when you hold onto the ball, right? So if we can equalize the game a little bit more, such that the difficulty level is the same, then it may become a little bit more exciting as well, because it is a more level playing field, right? And my experience in inventing games is that actually the less skillful players are the ones who are more creative with ideas. The more skillful ones are locked into the football rules, the basketball rules, but the less skillful players can come up with many, many creative ideas, right? There are friends who are more skillful, can smooth out the rough edges, but they lack the ideas of how to change the game. So in a way, the strengths are balanced. And the other part that I find really useful is for them to have multiple ways to surface their thoughts to me, and not just face-to-face, but also through, say, Padlet, for example, or through LMS that they can, I set a homework online and they can, like Google Classroom, that they can submit to me. I find that when I do that, they find this as a safe space for them to let me know their thoughts, which I can have an exchange of ideas with them, you know. And yeah, sometimes for some students which we thought that they are quiet, they are of a low cognitive level, but actually they are not. They are just quiet. Yeah, and as what Korey mentioned as well, those who are really, really quiet and probably would require a bit of scaffolding. So the different ways that we assess them is really important. It's not just through one way, but different ways so that we can triangulate. Whoever requires a little bit more support, we will come in with a little bit more questions to guide them. Yeah, so those are just some examples.
Thank you for great explanation. I think the role of the teacher is very important.
Yeah, definitely.
At times, the teacher must play the role to upgrade, to uphold the low skill student and low cognition students, so that they can be respected by the high skill students. Thank you for good sharing.
Thank you.
Linda, did you want to?
I was trying not to comment, but I can't help myself. So I think all of what my colleagues have said is true, but I also just want to, like, Joy's work is, this is one of the reasons she put it into inventing games. It doesn't take away from the games-based approach, but she took the concept of soccer and said, okay, let's not do that. I mean, the inventing games things is not new, but she situated everything in inventing so that in this way, learning about games was part of the structure. So I think that's a strength of her work, and that she grounded it in a framework as democracy in action. And if you look at her book, it's well scaffolded. So they don't invent a game in one day. This is like, it's like Tien is giving you the fast forward version of how he got the students, or how the teachers got the students where they are. It's a process of like 10 steps, and the process is the product. So I think it's a shift for the teacher. That doesn't mean you have to do it for every games unit you have, but when you embrace this as games as teacher with regard to JEDI concepts, I think that's one of the strengths of her framework, and that's one of her strongest legacies. Not that I'm a big fan of Joy Butler, clearly, but I think that's part of her legacy, and I think that's something that she gave us to grapple with, because this is not easy work. But I appreciate the thoughtfulness of the questions. That's it. I'm done.
Thank you for that, Linda. Is there any like last minute questions from anybody before we finish? Nope. I think it's been a very fantastic sort of presentation today, and I think we've had a really good kind of discussion there on how we can apply these components within a games-based approach as lessons. So I would like to thank again the presenters for joining us today and sharing their work and research. I would like to thank all of you for attending. The certificates of attendance will be emailed out within the next hour. There are other events and webinars going on, so please do check them out for the 40th anniversary. We have another webinar coming up on July 16th, which is on global lesson study. It's a fantastic interaction where you can discuss how to adapt your lessons and hear from other practitioners in the field of how they have their lessons, and it makes a great kind of conversation. So please do join us for that one. Beyond that, thank you very much for attending, and we look forward to seeing you in the future. Goodbye.
Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Bye-bye.
everyone.